This is the second of the two lessons looking at the API objects within ASP pages, and so it will be building on what we were looking at in the last lesson. And as we go through, of course, everything that we are dealing with are really building on things that we know. So we know about the importance of understanding the data model. We understand the importance of the views in the way in which they're responsible for the collection and bringing together of information. So we know so much about, say, list blocks, for example, are dependent on those views. We know as well that when we're working with our code, that it's essentially the same type of code that is used within, whether it's a table level script or whether it's a validation script. It's very similar objects, and there's a relationship between the objects that we reference that are in the server API and the ASP API. So there's a lot of scripting that is already familiar to us, and we're setting the scenes as well for when we go on and we explore this further with the component manager, and especially coding around the advanced email manager and web self-service. So everything that we're looking at is really setting the scene for further API usage. And there's actually similarities. The techniques and the sorts of things that we're doing within the ASP pages essentially are the same things that we can do with the .NET API. And all of the possibilities that we have here are possible again as well within the .NET API. We've got to build on what we were looking at before. So we'd started by thinking about the last lesson. We'd started to think about the way in which we could control the usage of tab groups, or the way in which we could use, for example, the idea of hyperlinks, etc. And I'll remind us about these things, but we need to go beyond that into taking where we've got our basic list and display and edit of a screen, so that we can actually manage the full life cycle of the data. So we can insert data, we can update data, and we can then delete data. And we'll consider what's happening when we issue the delete. We'll also remind ourselves or look at the role of the container in allowing us to construct complex screens. So far, in the complexity of the screens that we were dealing with in the last lesson, we were looking at the idea of a complex screen which consisted of two screen blocks, but they were both working with the same record. But what if we wanted to display information from other records? Can we in fact do that? Can we change the way in which the complex screens work, so they're mixing a list block with a screen block, and can we actually have a parent and child displayed in those complex screens? So we'll consider some of those. Now I might tie this in with the idea of using ASP pages in workflow, because if we only consider, for example, a bit of behavior as here, but for example editing an opportunity, it might be something that we would want to do to edit when we are workflowing within the context of an opportunity workflow. Why can't we edit not just the opportunity information, but the company information as well? We might be capturing information that we want to update in one screen, but would then be saved back into multiple screens. And so could we do that? Can we actually construct complex screens, added into workflow, doing work in different places at the same time? Could we also control where we are within our particular workflow process? And so that's questions about how do we solve problems with workflow to allow for redirection and behavior, and perhaps even control of processing. And so all of this is ultimately showing that ASP pages are very complex environments, or potentially complex environments, allowing us to perform all sorts of different tasks across multiple tables and multiple rows. Now, we're going to start by doing some sort of housekeeping type things. We're going to look at the structure of pages and look and thinking about how we can do basic things like adding a button. I just want to switch over to make sure that nobody has asked any additional questions, so that I can make sure that I include those within the scope as we go through in this lesson. Looks like nobody's popped in any questions. If you do have questions, do add them in as we go through. And I'm going to be looking now at the idea of inserting and working with buttons inside the interface. Let's go back in here where I was working within my CRM area at this panoply list. Of course, we know that this page can be changed in lots of different ways. One, for example, we can see in our listing of our information, we have got columns, we've got some behavior associated with those fields, and we might want to be able to add in the hyperlinks to go and look in depth at what's going on within the particular entity. So we're going to need to do some changing of this screen. So I'm going to go back into my definition of the secondary entity that we've got, our panoply contacts. And where we have the definition of the contacts list, I'm going to make some alterations because all I want to do is in here, I want to add in a hyperlink here just to remind ourselves that what we're doing is carrying out a custom jump and jumping across to the panoply contacts summary page and passing across the company ID field. So if we update that and have a look at contact name as well, I think it will allow for order by on the contact name, update and choose save, we can see that we'll have made a change to the way in which this page looks. So we've got our idea of clicking on Ramiro Itamio, and if we click across, we're onto this screen. Now we know that there's quite a lot of furniture changes that we can make. If this page, as we can see, is our panoply contact summary, and in our code that we had written in the last lesson, as we looked at this, we can see that the way in which the page is generated, it's referencing a tab group called panoply contacts. This is the reason why we don't have our horizontal menu here, because that doesn't exist in this particular system anymore. If I go back onto tabs and I click new and just add in my tab group, I'm going to add in my own little summary tab, which is calling the custom file, and the custom file of course here is the panoply contact summary tab. If I refresh this page, we can see that we now have this, and it is looking like the structure of a page. Now, this is all about buttons, this particular bit, and as we go through, we know we've got working buttons within our page here, and we also, if we were to go back into the panoply list, we also have the appearance of a list block, but it doesn't have, for example, a new button, it doesn't have a help button, it doesn't have other buttons that we might want to include within the screen. After all, what we should really be aiming at is something starting to move in the direction so we have buttons similar to this within the screen. There are two broad ways of working with buttons within inside a screen. We can either work with what are called the default buttons, or we can create our own custom buttons. Within ASP pages, there are some fixed defaults that are available to us. And these fixed and default buttons are actually properties somewhat of the container block and the individual screen blocks. This is why when we were looking within the product, when we look here, we've got this idea of a change button. That's a screen typically has the idea of a default button, and it understands itself as the idea of changing the mode of the screen into edit mode. And we'll be looking at the idea of mode and monitoring mode in a moment. But what happens in those circumstances? What have we got to allow us to work with buttons of various sorts? Well, here I'm switching in my case the idea of the editor that I'm using to open up a scratch pad so I can start using and exploring the snippet files. The snippet files cover really the main and basic usage of the different objects. So we've got lots of different ideas of properties which are common to blocks, for example, and this is what you've been using earlier on, the idea of setting a title or controlling whether something should be displayed onto a new line. And this basic type of property, for example, is very much to do with the alignment of fields within a screen or screens within a container. But these screens can actually have, or these objects in the form of the blocks can have other properties that may be of interest to us. So as we look down, you can see that there's a whole range of different examples on how to create different types of buttons, which I'll look at in a moment. But there are also ways in which we can control the appearance of the overall container within inside the system. And so there are, for example, ways in which we can add in properties for a screen and a container, which include, as you can see here, the way in which we can actually decide whether or not what we're writing is wrapped in a HTML form and behaves like a form, or indeed where its action was. I'll come back to this discussion of form action in a moment when we're considering the idea of creating a custom insert page. But if we look here at these properties, we can see that we've got some properties to allow us to add in some custom buttons within a container or within a screen. And so this is the idea of these display buttons, and then the flag of button default, for example, are variables that are referenced from within the include file. So if I look at our nolang file, where's my CRM nolang file? Is in here, and if we look here, the idea of those button defaults are actually flags which would be passed and used to turn on or turn off certain buttons. In a screen like the screen that we want, if we don't want to allow for a change button, if we want this only to be a view, then certainly that's good. And if I go into where I've got my scratch pad, as you can see here, and I think about my default behavior, and I look at my summary page is using the idea of the container. So container is the object that I'm using, and in here I can now say display button false. So if I refresh this particular page, what we'll find is that the change button disappears, and I'm not able now to click to change and edit this screen. So this would be the sort of thing that you'd want to do if you're designing a page that is simply to view information from an external system and not to allow the user to change it. Then this would be perfect, because now you've got just a display screen allowing details to be dug down still further. And there are all these different properties, as I was saying, that we started to see that allow us to change these items, and we'll come on to the idea of the delete button, etc., in a moment. But let's think about where we're going to go. We have to go and manage a life cycle for some data. So whereas we've just seen the idea of adding in, if you like, controlling the default button behavior of an edit screen, what about adding in a button to call a new bit of action to insert a record into our external database? What if we wanted to carry out an insert? Well, if we're going to allow for inserts, then I think we should allow for edits. So I'm just going to comment out the line that we saw in here. So if we're going to add in a new button, we'll do that in the context of the user list. So that's back within the context of where we see our panoply list. Okay, I wonder, does anyone have any questions as yet? No one, I believe, is throwing up any questions. So it looks like what I'm saying is making sense as we go through. Good. Well, if that is making sense, then the thing that I would like to do now is to look at adding a new button in here. And as you can see from the slides, we see that there's a couple of ways in which we can approach this. There's a method called CRM.button. The job of CRM.button is to build the HTML that contains the hyperlinks for the button action. So all buttons inside CRM are essentially hyperlinks. And so if we add a new button, you're calling a new page, one which will insert a new record. And here you can see there are three basic parameters to the button method. So if you're looking at the first example that I have up there, which is the idea of the string find company button, you'll see that there's a button that says search with a reference to search.gif, and then there's also crm.url. Now, of course, we're using the contemporary theme, and so the idea of that second parameter is not necessary. But if you're working within an upgraded system, or you're working with customers who've got their own custom themes, and custom themes are useful in high visibility situations, if you want to work in have a special theme for certain users working within low visibility areas or dusty environments like a warehouse, or you need high contrast for certain users, then you might want to use images still. And so search GIF, and then the third parameter is the behavior that is invoked. So crm.url there is wrapping whatever the 130 is with the correct parameters. So that's making sure that the state information for the hyperlink is going to be there. That's all the key 1 equals, key 2 equals, and so on. Those are the state, including as well, importantly, the session ID. Excuse me. So that 130 represents a system action that is being called, and the system action 130 happens to be find company. Remember, any action with inside CRM has got a system action associated with it. So if I was to look at the opportunities list here, we can see that that's calling action code 184. We've met action codes before when we were dealing with constructing some of the behavior with inside create scripts and the dummy behavior that we were looking at before. So we know about the use of the system actions. Well, that's the way in which you could redirect to an inbuilt system action, but we're going to actually take the approach of saying, well, we want to call our own custom button, calling an ASP page, and you can see in the second example there, call ASP button, where we've got CRM.button, and then the idea of the label and what it is, the image that's being used, and then the path to that. And that would have to be the full path to that particular file. But if we wanted to say, well, what about rights, security rights? What about that? Well, you can also see that if we wanted to, we can link the behavior here of this particular button to the existing security rights of the users and the system entity. So we could reasonably say, well, you can only update these contacts in the external system if you have the rights to the company inside CRM to be able to insert new companies. And so you would see the fourth and the fifth parameter are mentioning the entity that you want to link these rights to and the action that you want to use, and the allowed values there are delete, insert, view, and edit. The dive rights: delete, insert, view, and edit. Well, that's we're going to do that now. So if I wanted to add a new button, let's go back to my scratch pad, get rid of these for the moment. Right mouse click, insert snippet, my code snippets into Sage CRM within the ASP code, and looking down through these, I want to create a button to call an ASP page. And so this can't get much simpler than this. And the action that we want to call is new. So that's going to be new, and that's going to be new.gif. And what page am I going to call? I'm going to call this training, and I think we'll call this panoply contacts new.asp. That page doesn't exist yet, but we'll soon get a nice 404 error message from that. And so that's the code to build it. But to add the button, if we look here, the code to add the button again is not particularly hard to guess. We're going to find that it's called add button to a block. And so it is just a question of whatever the block is, and that could be the container, or it could be the list block, or it could be the screen block. We can then add that button there. So if I pick up my code from my scratch pad and go to my user list, we instantiate our block here, my block, and it's not a particularly clever name, string button name, but it works. And if I save this now, we should, when I refresh this list, see that there is a new button added to my page. And the new button, if I click it, will of course produce for me a nice 404 error message because I don't have my Panoply contacts new page. Well, of course, that's going to be very easy to create. So I'm just going to create, I think, within this page, I will choose to save as Panoply contacts new, and that's going to be Panoply contacts.js, and I need to look at my Panoply contacts.js file. It's going to be a bit different from this because this is creating a new file. Let's create something that is new, therefore, and save it as Panoply contacts new.js. Let's go back and just double check to see whether the 404 error message has disappeared. So if I refresh this page, we can see that it has. It's found the page, it's found the JavaScript file. Of course, the JavaScript file is not doing anything, so we've got a blank page. But we're almost ready to produce our page and get going with this. Now, if we insert the basic page outline, we have our basic page structure. This is going to be our new page. We have to think about what we're going to do within this page. Now, we used some thoughts here before. Where we have this idea of contacts new, what do we have to do? Well, we have to do much the same thing. We have to get the screen from metadata. We have to get what context information that we have. In the case of this new menu, we'll really only have information about the user because we're not creating this in the context of anything else. This external entity is not linked to anything. But we can then start to worry about not getting the record. We're not fetching anything. We can then start to create the record. And once we've created the record, we can also add links or details to record not entered in screen. We also then have to add the record object to the screen and generate the HTML. So we actually have to send the HTML to the browser. Now, the trick here is that if we think about the way in which typically a page works, if we are creating something that is new, like a new opportunity. When we click new opportunity, for example, here you can see we come straight in, as we've got here, into edit mode. We're ready to insert. But if we were looking at the just editing things, looking at an existing opportunity, for example, and following this, we can see we've come straight into into view mode rather. And if I go back into panoply list and I follow what we've written so far, this screen is only displaying in view mode. What we want to do is be able to control the screen so that it is, when we follow the link to the new, this page, whatever this page, which is currently blank, but whatever is created, this should come up ready for us to work with the new record that's being inserted. So we have to not only get the screen from metadata, but we also then have to make sure the screen is in edit mode and ready to insert data. And what happens when we have inserted data? That's the next thing to consider. If we go to an opportunity, and if I look at my company here, there's a company, and I choose to create in the company new opportunity. I'm entering the details for the new opportunity. I say test oppo, fill in all of the information that I need. So I'm currently logged on as Susan May, and I want to close this by the end of the month. Fill all that in, and I choose save. What we see is we're taken from the new page onto the action which represents the summary page for this opportunity. And so somehow after inserting the record, we are brought back to the summary page. So once the record is inserted, redirect to the summary page, because we have the summary page already in existence. Okay, so that's what we're going to do, and we'll build up gradually to do this. And hopefully you'll see that it's not a particularly hard thing to worry about. Now, some things are easy, like get the screen from metadata is something that's something we can just cheat, because we've already done that, and we can look at exactly like this, and we can say we want to get this, and we also want to get hold of our container as well. So we can look at our screen here, and we can say, well, so far so good. This is the same. It can be copied across and used in the same way. You here could actually have put this into this type of code. You could have put this into an include file. So you could have included that, so that common setup for this page could just be automatically brought in without you having to think about something that you maintain. You'd maintain it in one place and use it in several places. So the next thing after we've done that is to look at the contextual information. Well, the contextual information, I'm not sure what we're going to put in here and whether it's directly relevant, but context, of course, is something that we can get, and that is within the idea of the current user. So I'll get hold of the contextual information. So we just make sure that we've got, if necessary, the user ID. And then the next thing that we do is that we have to create the record. Now, creating the record is done in a number of ways. We've used the idea of working with the record object within the validation script and within side table level script already. And if I look here, we're going to meet now the idea that we're brand new from scratch, creating a brand new record that will be committed into the database rather than simply editing an existing item. So I'm running down my snippets to find the little bit of code where we've got the sense of being able to create a new record. Now, the create a new record doesn't know how we're using this. We are going to be using a record in the context of a screen. The screen is going to be the thing that manages the commitment of the data. So you'll see in the code that I've written out that it's got reference to save changes. That isn't relevant for our particular circumstances, because the changes are going to be driven from the saving of the changes is going to be driven from the user action within the screen. But we do have here, as you can see, the idea that we can create a new record called contacts in the external database. Because CRM opens the connection to this database, it can manage the interaction through what are called ADO, advanced data objects within the COM objects, and that's fine. You know, it works very neatly being able to do that, except, as I'll explain a little bit later on, we might want to create a separate version of this screen once we've done this in this way, to consider the idea that our screen may in fact be better served by interacting with a web service in the other system, rather than trying to interact directly with the database. But there's our idea of that. There's the record, there's the contacts, and you'll notice here that we can set values that aren't displayed within the screen. And what I can do if I go into my database is just remind myself of some of those field values. So if I go and look in my database, which is Panoply Tech, let's go into Panoply Tech and I look at my contacts database, we can see that we've got for example, postcode, fax, whatever. You've got lots of different numbers that we can put in here. And what I will do is I'll specify the type automatically to be prospect. So in here, I'm going to say type. Type. Will be prospect. Now, if I finish editing this and just in here where we've got set workflow info, this set workflow info is not used in our context here. We'll look at the idea of set workflow context when we're dealing with in workflow in about 20 minutes when we're starting to consider pages, complex pages which are created in the context of workflow. So here my set workflow info is not relevant, and so these two lines I'm going to take out. So I've got a record object, I'm setting some attributes for the record that are not going to be displayed on the screen. And the next thing that I need to do, so you can see that we've got add links or details to the record not screen, is add the record to the screen and generate the HTML and send the HTML to the browser. Well, this is where we go back to our friend, the idea of the container block, which we know in here, which we know how that was being done. Because before, we just used this idea of the add container block and get page to do that. That's something that I'll do in here. We'll say that we're going to take our container, add our record to the container, and then we're going to write that out. Now, there is another change that I want to do in a moment, but you've got this idea of get page, where you've got the tab group that is to be referenced. Well, if we think about the tab group when we come on to creating a new opportunity, for example, we don't have a menu running across the top. There is in fact a much more definite way of setting the context for pages when we're working with this, and I'll look at that in a second. But for now, let's get rid of that. So we're not going to use that tab group. Instead, we'll take the default, and then I'll just do a little bit of a change once we've looked at what we've got so far. So we've got our code written out, and I'm going to see how this behaves. So if I go into my CRM, Panoply list, we've got our new button, and I'm going to click new. Now what we can see is that we've got a screen that is in view mode, so it's not in the right node. We've got the wrong tab group, and if we click change, it's switched over into edit mode. And if I type, let's type in here, it's Friday, so let's put Friday in here. Friday, Friday, Friday. This is all nonsense, of course, but there's the Friday information. I save that. That's saved, but actually it's not on the summary page. It still thinks it's on the new page. And so if I click the change button, what's happening? Well, here it's starting to want to enter another new record. It's not actually changing behavior. So we need to do the management of the mode, and we need to do the management of what happens after we've committed, and we need to manage the menu within the page. If we look though at panoply list, and we look right at through this through the lists that we've got, look at the contact names, at the idea that if we get to our contact names, we should see that there's a Friday in here. And there you go. So our record, Friday, 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 has successfully been committed into the database. So that, and you can see it even went in as a prospect, which is good. So we need to take this a little bit further. We need to be able to get our behavior as we want it. And so this is back inside the code, and we need to think about what's happening. So how do we handle mode to come into edit mode? Well, here we've got a snippet that talks about mode. And as we look down in here, we should see there's the concept of setting the correct mode for the page. And it's going to immediately confirm that it's not setting my mode. Where's my mode? Oh, there we are. Set page mode. That was very silly of me. Set page mode. So if I can look here, we can see that there's just the way in which we can say, but straight away, CRM.mode is equal to edit mode. Now these variable, that's a variable that we can see in here, and that comes again from the CRM nolang, and the include file, you can see that there are mode constants which have been defined for us. Just simply pushing us into edit mode is not what we want to do. We actually want to be a little bit more subtle about this. We want to say if crm.mode is equivalent to view. So if we find ourselves in view mode, then what we want to do is we want to be pushed into edit mode, and that's what that's the behavior that we want. We also can set the menu and the context, so we can see that in amongst these snippets as well there was a reference to the idea of setting the context so that it knows that we're dealing with a new page, and we can see this idea of set context for a new page, and you can see it's no more difficult than that. So crm.setContext. Now I'm going to cheat here. What I'm going to do is on this page, I write at my execute, or just where we've got the execute, I'm going to put in a CRM dot add content, and in here say CRM dot mode. The reason I want to do this is that I want to look at the idea of how mode changes according to the execute method. What effect does the execute method have on mode? So if I save that now and I look at the idea of new, what we can see is that we've got a 1 and a 1. We are, on this particular case, we've come in to the new page, we are in edit mode as that executes. So if I put in Friday 2, and I save, what we can see is that we are in the mode of 2, which, if we looked at our nolang file, is the save mode. So it knows that we've come into the save mode, and we could use that test to see, are we in the save mode at this point, to redirect. Now it hasn't made a difference as to where we do this, except we want to save it deliberately, so our actual redirect is going to be after the execute, but before the page is written out. So here I'm going to include a check similar to the one before, which is saying crm.mode. If the mode here is save, then what I want to do is I want to do a redirect, and we saw the idea of redirect when we were looking at the general idea of the ASP pages. So response.redirect, and in here I'm going to say CRM dot, and where do I want to go? I want to use crm.url, and I want to go to training, and then into the Panoply contacts summary. Now this bit is going to be a little bit hard, and I want to raise a deliberate mistake first of all, so that you understand what you need to do. So I'm just going straight to the page with the current context, but that's not going to be sufficient. We'll see that it looks pretty good up until it goes wrong. Like a lot of things, really. The idea here, then we have our Panoply list. We've got our new page. You can see here it's very neat. Let's have a Friday 3. Friday 3. Friday 3. And we choose save. And what we'll find is, as we move across, we've got a problem because it doesn't know which record that we're using. Now, in my logs, if I go off to look into administration and into system and into the logs, I've only got error logging in here, so I should be able to look at my SQL logs and pull that up. I had some logging switched on earlier on, but here we can see that we've got the idea of an invalid column name undefined, because we're saying select star from contacts where company name equals undefined. We're not providing it. The page expects us to provide the company ID, and in fact, if we think about think about that, it's perfectly true. If we go into the My Panoply contacts list and we look at a company like this, we know when we jump across, we've included the company ID into the URL. So we need, when we jump after the insert, to have that same information added as well. So the URL needs to include the company ID that we're going to. Actually, what I'll do is take that and add the idea of the ampersand company ID. There's an additional bit of information that we're going to add, and then we need to add in whatever this company ID variable is that we're dealing with. Now, of course, we've just saved this record and we defined our record up here. So we actually have the record object available to us. So I can use my record here and then reference within this the field that I'm interested in, which is company ID. So now, if I go into my CRM panoply list, choose new, add in all the information that we want, so I put in the information, choose save, and the redirection is that I've managed to redirect to a page that doesn't exist. So I've come down to, and here that needs to be a question mark, doesn't it? So there's something that I need to think about. So I actually have got my brackets in the wrong place there. So there's my URL, or yes, it was in my brackets. One bracket was in the wrong place. So let's do that again. So we save, and we can see that we've come into the summary page as we've got here, and we've passed in across the company ID, and it's been able to parse that URL and grab that information. So that might have been a little bit more tricky than you necessarily had immediately wanted, but that is the way in which we can use the newly created record to allow us to control the context that we're in. Half the battle within CRM is the idea of managing where we are, the idea of keeping the state, keeping the context right for the work that we want to do. Okay, let's see if anyone's got any questions about what I've just been sharing. Well, no one is shouting out any questions, so that's hopefully everything is looking good and everything that you're happy with there. Going back into my code now, we can see how we can start to think about how we're going to take this still a little bit further. We've got the management of this flow, so we know about how the buttons can be used. We've started to think about, we know about the view page structure, and we've started to think about the idea of the insert, update and delete. Now what I want to do, if we looked at the add page, as we've got here, the basic add page structure, is I want to take this now and start to think about other uses of the container to allow us to search for information or filter information. So performing this action, getting to a page, wouldn't it be interesting if we could go up into the find menu and find the contact in the external database in the same way? And that would be good. And so what I want to do here is to use the idea of a new menu option within inside that system menu, which is the find menu, to allow us to do that. So I come down in here and choose find, and I'm going to choose now to say that this is a panoply contact. So panoply contact, custom file, and this is going to be training, and this is going to be panoply contacts find.asp. And of course that doesn't exist. That's all right. I'm going to treat it like the company information. So we save that, and Now over here, if I refresh my page and look into my list, you can see there's Panoply Contact. If I click on Panoply Contact, we get our 404 error. 404 is a good, nice error. It's easy enough to remedy. We just need to come back to one of our pages here and choose to File, Save As, Panoply Contacts Find. Create our Panoply Contacts Find JavaScript file. And so if I was to refresh this now, we would get a blank page indicating that everything's working, but nothing's working because I haven't got any code in my JavaScript file. So if I remedy that, put my basic structure in place, and think about what we're going to do in this circumstance. Now in this circumstance, we're going to be using a container, and we're going to be using a search block and a results grid. So what I'm going to choose is to say, what am I going to say? I'm going to say get search block from metadata, get results grid from metadata. We're also going to set the context to the find menu. We're then going to create a container, and within that we're going to link the container to the container blocks to each other, so they do the search. Now the important thing that I would also say here is make the metadata do the hard work. So that's where we need to start. We need to go back as the system administrator back into our definition of our secondary entity. Our secondary entity here, which of course is our Panoply Contacts. Within the screens, well actually I'll start with creating a new list, and this is going to be a Panoply Contacts grid. I'm using the convention, I'm creating, rather than just simply reusing list, I'm creating a contacts grid because that's the convention within Sage CRM. You have a separate type of list which hangs from a tab, and you have a separate type of list that is the result of a search. And so in this case, we're going to be searching our table contacts, and we can add in the fields that we want. So what do we want? We have in add our company name, contact name. I think we'll have the type as well. Let's have then the email address. I'll have city, an email address, and then finally the web page as well. So that's going to be a full item, with one exception I want to add in here. In the company name, I will add in here a custom jump. This is within the results set, custom jump, and we'll say that's going into the training contact summary, passing a training contact summary, passing across the company ID. So I update that field and save that, and so that's defined as my results grid. The screen that I need to create as well is a little bit more different, because up to now we've only created in metadata things that are entry screen. So now when I create this, this is going to be my Panoply Contacts search box. And this is going to be a search screen with an associated list, which of course is my Panoply Contacts grid. So I save that. I've now can add in the fields that I want to allow for searching. And I think I want to be able to search by company name, person name, to be able to have the type, and I think the type of company it is as well. So they'll just be on the one line, and I choose save. And that's done. So the metadata is going to do the hard work, and all we need to do is to make sure that we glue things together within the page. We bring things inside the pages that we've got here. So what do we want to do? We want to get hold of the blocks. So this is going to be var my block. Well, let's actually call this my search block. My search block is equal to crm.getBlock, and the block that we're getting is the Panoply Contacts search box, and we're getting then the results block, and so this is my Panoply Contacts grid. So that's the two, and the next thing is that we need to look at the container. So insert snippets, my code snippets, CRM, looking at the idea of the ASP pages, and I run that down. I want a container. So there's a container block example, and we're being invited to enter in the names of the blocks within the container. So that's easy. The first one is going to be my search block. My search block. I don't want that. I don't want that. My search block. And the second one is going to be my results block. And of course that needs to be passed across and used here as well. Now, do you notice how I've introduced the idea of this arg_obj property? The arg_obj property is it's a shorthand way of getting hold of the where clause of the object. And in this particular case, we are saying we're taking the information provided from this block, and we are adding it to this block. We're basically building our where clause from the information within the container, which is great. And the next thing that I need to do is to insert my snippets, look at my code snippets, and now write the container onto the screen. So this is where we use the generate preferred method. So my block container is the object. We've not got in here any object being passed into it because everything is within the results set. Rather than that, we're not using a record object. We're not using a where clause either. So we can take that out, and we have set our context, of course, up at the top where we or we will do in a moment, because we haven't actually, we haven't set the context for the find menu, so we just need to do that. So I should set the context, so my right insert snippet, my code snippets, Sage CRM ASP, and we look down in here at the idea of setting where we've got the setting page properties and setting the context, or setting the context for the find page. It's just a matter of using set context. Again, what we've got now, if we look at our page, is a working search page. You can see that I've got the top information in here. If I look for prospect and click find, you can see that it's finding all of the prospects that I've added in today. Now so that is the way in which we can create this combined page. Now there's a little bit more that we've got to consider. We've got to use the idea of put this together for the mode, buttons, everything, because now I want to think about deleting information. So I've got a link to this page that I would like to get rid of. I'd like to be able to click change. I'd like to see a delete button. I'd like to be able to delete the information. So how do I delete? You might think that, oh, I've got to worry about so much, when in fact we don't have to worry about so much. It's actually very straightforward, because we met this in our scratch pad earlier on, way back when we were looking at the idea of the different types of buttons, and you'll see that there is a default button called button delete. So I can take that idea, and in our page, which is the summary page, where we've been dealing with the with our screen, I can add in reference to the delete button. So now if I look at my screen, so I refresh this, we can see that there's a delete button. If I consider mode as well, so if I consider mode by saying in here CRM dot, actually that's not in the right place, do it down here, CRM dot add content CRM dot mode, what we will see is that we are in mode 0. If I click change, we're in mode 1. If I go back, if we look at the delete, we can see that we go into mode 3. If I delete this, we go into mode 4 and we've got a blank screen. Well, we don't want a blank screen. We would like to be redirected somewhere logical, probably a list of the current context. So I would send that back into the My CRM panoply list, which would be a fairly sensible thing to do. So we've got to use the idea of mode to control where we go if we've deleted. And of course we know mode changes because of the execute. So in here I can add a little bit more behavior by saying if crm.mode is equal to, and the mode that I'm interested to check is post delete. So if I'm 4, that's when I need to redirect somewhere. So back inside my code, which was for my summary page, so if my summary page now is mode post delete, then what do I want to do? I want to do a redirect. So I want to do a response dot redirect Where am I going to? crm.url, that's where I'm going to, and the URL that I'm heading off to is within training, and this is going to be panoply contacts user list.asp. So there, if I've just deleted it, go back to the listing of the contacts. And so, in fact, if I go into Friday, here's Friday. Oh, do you see the mistake that I've made? This is a very common mistake when you're working with if statements. I've actually put an assignment in there rather than a test for equivalence. So if I just make that a test for equivalence, it's very annoying. It's one of those things that it just can drive you potty as you're trying to find things, but you have to be aware of what you're doing. Flow through, and just like I've been doing, add messages to the screen to help you work out where you are at any one time. So if I go onto my record, that's not updated yet. Did I save it? I haven't saved it. If I go into my screen, you can see here there's my reference to the screen. There's my delete button. Click on delete, confirm my delete, and you can see that I'm brought back onto this page. You can see it's working well. Delete, confirm delete, and back we come in here. We've only got a couple more Friday records in there. Now there are other things that we can do. For example, it's all very well and good having our display delete button. What if we also wanted to make sure that we had a cancel button? So we can see that we've got the idea of a button continue or a button cancel is possible as well, and we could have added in different forms of buttons, as we can see here, which could call, cancel, and we could actually describe our own button behavior as well. Okay, so that's the search page structure that we've talked about. We've handled quite a lot of information there about the structures. We've certainly looked at buttons in details. Let's think about some aspects of dipping into a screen or to a list to control features, for example. For example, what if we didn't want to put the definition of the hyperlinks into metadata? What if we wanted to add the hyperlink in here within the page? So if I wanted to link to Harry Kumar or Hanamu's and add in a hyperlink, how would I do that if I wanted to do it outside of code? Well, what we can do is we can actually get hold of the individual columns within a list, and the same goes for a screen field as well, and we can change those properties. So in my instance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at my code snippets, come down in here and look at the idea of going into my ASP page and running down to where we've got the idea of grabbing hold of a grid column block. So it's a grid column block, and I want to be able to get a grid column block from a list. So this is the basic code. Once I've got a grid column block, I can change its properties. So inside here you can see that I've actually thought through the range that you might want to set quite a wide range of different properties. Now all these properties are in the documentation. Remember the developer guide that I pointed out to you within the community that you can reference. And so in here you can set custom jump properties, which is the thing that we're talking about. So if you wanted to, this is where you go to. Or if you wanted to add a hyperlink, you could do that as well. So these are all things that are in the code that we can reference our cells. So down here, look to my idea of the grid column block and set properties. You can see there's the ability to jump to particular screens if you wanted to, and so on. Now I think it might be nice to change the properties of customer, supplier, see if there's an image available to us. So what would happen there? What would be in that circumstance? Well, that field is type. So I look at type, getting hold of type, and I can start to use this inside my search screen. I'll do it within the search screen, so where we go off to finding information. So if I go into Panoply Contact and look at this information here, you can see the idea of the type, so I can represent that. Let's get rid of that. Find. Okay. We're going to come back to look at the idea of custom buttons within the context of a find button as well, because it's quite important that we need to look at the range of buttons. But here's our different type. What if we wanted to change the way in which that worked? We've got our block, which is the results grid. So my results block, I get hold of the type field. I've just managed to get that wrong. Let's reinstate. Let's paste that back. Oh, I managed to delete that. Snippet file. There's my snippet file. There's my snippet file. So that's the page thing that I want. In my find, paste that in. My results block, I get hold of the grid column type, writing into my grid column type field. So I've got my grid column type now, and so as we saw within the snippet file, I can change properties of those to say that what I want to do is show select as GIF. So in here, my field is grid column type. I'll allow order by and show select by GIF, and that is going to be true. I choose save. So when we look at this now, do another find, what we'll see is that that's not had the change that I wanted, except it is ordering, so it is working on that, on the type, but it hasn't changed it as GIF because in the definition of the field, it's not a selection list. I go back into my selection list of type, and I change this to a selection, and I'll be quick about this and change it to be the same as the company type. So there's now an associated selection list. That should mean that we are displaying images. And if I were to go into my CRM install, go down into CRM, go down into WW Root, go down into themes, go down into images and into ergonomic choices, and I create, let's have a look at where we've got this won't make a lot of sense, but I'm copying this in, going to change this to being in here comp type. Comp type, change this to be customer, change that to be supplier, and change that to be prospect. So we've got those three images in there now, and so if I find again, you can see that I've changed dynamically the type. So if I look for type and say I want to look for customer, find, customer, look at supplier, find, and so on. Look at searching by contact name. It becomes more interesting as we look through the lists as the type of information that is shown. Okay, so all find, and we can see that there we've got our type being displayed quite neatly. Okay, we're coming to the official end of this, but what I want to do is I want to keep going because there's so much more that I want to share with you. Let me just take a check to see whether people are comfortable with me continuing. So this is going on longer. Everyone happy to continue? If you want to drop out or if you want to ask a particular question now, then that's good. I'm just aware that we did talk about it being a 90 minutes session, but if you do need to drop out, that's understandable. I'm going to continue because there's so much more I want to share with you. Good. I would continue even if you were the only one, Dwayne. I would continue. Right, let's keep going. We have got some more exciting things to think about because obviously we've got this page working, but I've been putting this into the context of a find page which doesn't look like the regular find pages. So if I do a look at a regular person page and I do a search, you can see I've got a clear button. So how does that work? I'm going to add now another button into my find page to make it even better. And so in my scratch pad area, right mouse click, insert snippet, my code snippets, so CRM, ASP, buttons, and you'll see that there is an example of create a clear search page button. You know, this isn't something that we have to hand write. It's written for us. It's all useful stuff, and it's the best way of building a system, which is essentially out of Lego blocks. And if I look to my find page again, and I look to where we've got our container, I'm going to say, well, there's my button, and I want to be able to add a button in here. We know from before we've got this idea of add button, so I'll choose add button, and I'll say now str button name. So add in my str button name, and so back I go to look for my Panoply contact, and you can see I've got a clear button. If I search for competitor, choose find. If I look for supplier, choose find, and now if I click clear, you can see that it resets it, so it's an empty search page. This is pretty cool. So we know that we've got within, it's trusting things like the SDK, trusting things like the snippets to provide us with examples on how to accomplish things. And likewise, just as we had a example to help us with that list block and set the property of the list block, we've got ways in which we can do the same things from the columns and the grid columns to do the same with the entry groups and the individual fields as well. Well, individual fields, there are articles. One of the things that we have done recently is made sure that we sort of took stock of all of the articles that were on the community, and if you look into the partner area and have a look at searching for roundup articles, you can see here that we've got a roundup of articles about creating ASP pages, and you can see this is one of these recent articles I did when I was researching what I wanted to talk about in today's lesson, and there's stacks of material here, including constructing and editing pages as well. So you'll know as much as I do if you read and remember everything in those pages. Well, hopefully you will. But what we've looked at so far is, if you like, building pages that are used in a nice simple way. They're used to create the life cycle, but they're not controlling the process. So the life cycle is the insert, update, delete, and by extension the standard data task of insert, update and delete. There's also the find. But what about the idea of workflow, which is I want to do a little bit of work, I want to do a little bit more, I want to make this change, make that change, I want to put it into the idea that there's a process involved. How can we start to use ASP pages in a process? Well, here we can do some exciting things, because ASP pages allow us to really look at what we're doing instead of being limited to the core behavior of workflow. We can do whatever we like. So we're not limited to the standard set of behavior. We can do whatever we like. And of course we can do whatever we like externally. And we can do whatever we like on more than one record. And we can create a custom entity, for example. We can do all sorts of things. If I take you now back into our application, what I would like to do is think about not the contacts entity here. What I want to do is think about a system entity, just the opportunity here. If I look at an opportunity, once I'm in a workflow, once I'm working away and processing this, I might want to edit some details. Now you can see here, if I click change, for example, I can change who this opportunity belongs to in terms of which company, which person, but I couldn't change here the details of the company. And if I click on one of the workflow actions available to me are really only the workflow actions within this entity. This is because workflow is based on a view which will be based on a single table. So it only wants to be able to enter and change items within a single table. But of course, our workflow action might involve, if we're credit checking somebody, we might be updating not only the opportunity to confirm that it's ready to go on to the next stage, but in fact we can enter the credit check information for that company as well. So what if we wanted to have some behavior that did that? Now I am going to go as a system administrator into advanced customization and into workflow, where I am going to now alter the default opportunity workflow. We're going to look at two bits of behavior. One is going to start off with a nice simple task, which is to make those changes to both the company and person, and then a second one which is to move us on in the workflow process. So I'm going to look at essentially two ideas. And if I edit my workflow, the first thing that I will do is I will create a new global rule. So this particular rule that I'm going to create is not designed for movement through the workflow, but simply allowing us to perform a task. So my new rule is going to be update company and Oppo. This is going to be a global rule, and it's going to call a custom file name, and this is going to be training, and I'm going to say this is company Oppo update .asp, and I'll enable this rule and I'll choose save, and we can see we've got this button update Oppo and company. And can I point out that if you are working with an ASP page, as I am here, you can't add any other workflow actions. Well, you can, but they will be ignored when the rule is executed, because the rule can only invoke one hyperlink, and that one hyperlink will go to the ASP page rather than into the actions of the workflow button. So this overrides anything that you might put in here. Okay. So I've got now my workflow rule. I'll activate my workflow, and so if I refresh this particular page, we should see that I've got my new workflow rule button, which is update company and Oppo. And if I click on it, what do I get? I get a 404 error, which of course is my favorite error. So it is easy. It is just a question of going into one of my existing ASP pages and saying file save as, and this is going to be, I have to remember what I called it there, company Oppo update.asp. There we are. It's a useful trick to always remember what you're calling your file. So that's what I'm calling it, and that means I will call my JavaScript file the same thing. I'll create a new JavaScript file with nothing in it at the moment. So if I refresh this, we get our blank page, which is great. Okay. This page is going to allow us to do several things. It's going to allow us to revise the idea of context. It's going to allow us to revise the idea of getting hold of blocks, getting hold of records as well, but also use the idea of a new, within a container, the idea of a new property called arg object, which we saw in the context of the search block being used in a different way. So my code snippets within ASP page, I'm going to choose the basic file structure, and in here we can now start to decide what we're going to do. So let's get the company block, we can get the Oppo block that we're going to use, we can get the context of the company, get the context of the Oppo, get the company record, get the Oppo record. We can then add the company record to the screen, add the Oppo record to the screen. We can create a container. We can then generate the HTML and send to the browser. We'll have to do other things as well, because what we'll have to do is we'll have to think about context. So think about mode. And we'll also have to think about mode in here. So we'll have to think about mode. Because what happens if we think about an edit page within a workflow, normally a change button, of course we go into edit mode. And if we choose save, where do we go? We go back into the screen with the workflow. So we're going to have to think about mode as well. But that's just about it. And it's been pretty consistent so far. When we've been doing work before, if we think about what we have to do, each sentence that we come out with just about results in a line of code. So we've got what there, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, a dozen lines of code. That's it. And that will produce a complex screen for us. So in here, and I'll write this as we're going to do this, if CRM mode is view, then we're going to say CRM.mode is going to be edit. And we can then get hold of the block. So var my company block is equal to CRM.getBlock, and we'll use the company box long. We'll get hold of my Oppo block, and we'll say CRM.getBlock, and in this case what we'll get hold of is the opportunity detail box. And we then want to get hold of the context, so var my company ID is equal to CRM.getContextInfo, and here we can be a little bit cunning. When we will ask CRM.getContextInfo, we issue a select star from whatever table that we want. So that the first property is the table, and the second property is the context that we want. Now, if we go to the opportunity table, we can ask for the Oppo and then the field that is in the opportunity table that we're using. So use CRM73, which is the name of my database, select star from opportunity, and the foreign key that we're using here is the idea of the primary company ID. So if I go and ask for primary company ID, I get hold of that information for the company that's in context. And by now, when I do my Oppo ID, I can use more or less the same bit of code, get context info, here, getting hold of my opportunity. But this second grab of the opportunity doesn't result in a second, doesn't actually result in a second query going to the database. It's because it's already got select star from opportunity within the scope of the running of this code. So my company ID my Oppo ID. That's great. And the next thing that we need to do is get hold of the company record. So in this case, I can say var my company record is equal to crm.find record, and we have these two structures in here, which is the first of all, which is the where are we going? Find record is going to be going to the company, and we then need to build in our where statement, which is company, and that's going to be comp underscore company ID is equal to, well, of course, that's equal to the idea of the my company ID. So I can have a look at my company ID, and that will have retrieved for us there the company record, and my Oppo record. We can repeat the same thing, but obviously I'll have to change this because we're now dealing with the opportunity record, and we say Oppo. Notice the deliberate mistakes there. Oppo opportunity ID is my Oppo ID, and what do we have to do next? We have to add the company record to the screen, which is where we would say my company block dot arg object is equal to my company record, my Oppo block dot arg object is equal to my Oppo record. So we're adding different items into these screens, and let me just also make it a little bit smarter, because I'm going to say my company block dot title is equal to crm dot get trans that's tab names company and so we've added in the arguments, so we need to create a container. So in here we insert our snippets, my code snippets, CRM, ASP, look down here to the idea of creating a container. So there's a container block. The container is fine, I'll leave the container name, and the first block is going to be my company block, and the second one is going to be my Oppo block, but we're not using the mechanism down below in here. We've just added the block that we want in here. The next thing that we need to do, according to my notes, is that we need to generate the HTML and send to the browser. So we know how to do that. That's again into the my code snippets CRM ASP, looking at the sending out, and that sending out that we would do using the preferred method. Our block is my block container. We're not passing in an argument into that. We need to set no, we don't. We're not setting any other context in here, no other tab group. That's fine. But we do need to say, we do need to change this, because we need to say after the execute, you need to ask the question, have we just saved this? If CRM.mode is equivalent to save, then what do we want to do? We want to say that we want to response dot redirect to, in this case we can go to a system action, and the system action can be the page here, which is the system action 263, just the nice opportunity summary page. So or 26, or better still, the idea of here we've got 260 as the summary page. So I'll put that back inside here as the action that we're going to invoke. So all that lines of code, stuff that you should be able to do just by working out what are the steps that we need to do. And if I now refresh my page, we should, if I click on my update company in Oppo, have an edit page allowing me to change information for the company in context and the opportunity in context together. So if I change this to Design Right Limited, if I change this to 50 users plus consulting and training, and choose Save, you can see that it's updated the information in here. By the way, I've got a little, I have a test in here as well, which was actually a table level script firing as well. It's rather peculiarly, it's added in the word test onto the submitted value. But that's an unfortunate thing. There's a little bit of code. But you have seen the limited change, and you've also seen the fact that we've been able to change the company and we've changed the opportunity together, all within the one code with one bit of page. Very, very straightforward, very nice code, very neat, and hopefully readable as well. Obviously it'll become a little bit more readable if you space things out, but you can see that it's not too difficult to understand what we're doing in this situation. Now, what if we wanted to go? That's the editing of the two things together. What if we now want to say, where do we take this in terms of pushing us on into the next workflow? Well, in the case of a rule that we'll see when we look at the component manager, because we'll be looking at the component manager in one of the subsequent lessons. In fact, what we'll be doing next is starting to look at the component manager. So next lesson, next week, is component manager. We'll look there at the role of the ASP pages that are generated, and that will include, when we come on to the use of the advanced customization wizard as an example of a component, seeing how in fact we use in the generated code the idea of forcing the record, creating a record, and then, as you can see here, setting workflow. We saw that within the snippets earlier on. Now, if we look at our existing records and think about what do we have to do here, if I wanted to, you see we're in lead, state lead. If I go back to workflow and look, and I've wanted to create a button that would take us and jump us from lead straight to quoted. So we go straight from lead to quoted without having to do anything else. We just wanted to say move us through here. This is not too difficult. I can create a transition rule that will do that. So here, for example, if I edit my workflow again, I'm going to create a new rule. I'm going to say jump from lead to quoted. I'll leave it as a transition rule, and I'll call this inside training. This is going to be jump lead to quoted .asp. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll enable that rule and save it. By enabling the rule, what I can do is I can drag this into my page. So I can drag this into the workflow underneath the lead area. Oh, did I say that as a global rule? Oh, I did. I managed to do that. Let's cancel that. Let's go back into my opportunity workflow. I jump lead to there. So I've got jump lead to quoted, and I need to bring quoted down to that location. So there's quoted, which I will drag down to here. So I've got another way of getting from a lead to quoted without going through proposal submitted and all that action. I will have my own custom way of getting there. And it might be that I want to do a whole series of other jobs. Now, once I've done this, I can activate my workflow. And of course, on my page, if I refresh my page, you should see that I've got now an action that says jump from lead to quoted. So if I click on jump from lead to quoted, I get my 404 error. So we're very good at finding the 404 errors and understanding those. Let's actually save as and get rid of those 404 errors. And create a new JavaScript file and create that as my jump to lead. And if I refresh this, we've got our blank page. Now what I want to do, if I go back here, is actually we see it saying lead here. I want to click on my jump from lead to quoted, and I just want it to arrive back on this screen, and this now then to say quoted with the appropriate available workflow rules. I want to jump over actions. Now our page structure is going to be just the same as we've seen before, the idea of this basic structure of the page, and what we'll have to think about is we'll have to get the context of the oppo that we're in. We'll then have to well, in reality of what we were doing is we'd have a whole lot of do whatever. So whatever the purpose of this page was, and then we would have to at this point reset or change the workflow. Now if you think back to what we were doing with workflow before, the way in which we changed that was update the workflow instance information. And this is not difficult to do. So I'll get the context of the oppo. If we insert snippet and go on, let's do this by typing it in. So var my oppo ID is equal to CRM dot get context context info and it's the opportunity, and we want the opportunity ID, and we would then do whatever, the page would do whatever, and what we want to do is to set the workflow. And as you can see here, we're relying on the manual change of the existing workflow instance record. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look at the idea of taking this, because I am going to cheat, and let's paste it into TextPad first of all, and then take it across and put it back into here. We've got the idea of needing to retrieve the record for the opportunity. So we need to get hold of our opportunity record as well. So I can say here var my oppo record is equal to crm.find record where we're getting hold of the opportunity, and we get, for some reason I've decided to call everything opportunity, so where with the oppo underscore opportunity ID is equal to my oppo ID. I'm not sure why it wasn't picking up the IntelliSense for that. So we have the idea of finding for the current opportunity. We can then decide to set the correct workflow state input that we want. Well, if we go and look at the idea of the workflow, and we can see that the opportunity workflow, if I look at this, is workflow 2, and I look for the workflow state, then we can see which workflow state we have to set. Now they're all in different workflow IDs, so where wk state underscore workflow ID is equal to 2, which was the opportunity workflow, we can see that to get and jump from lead to quoted, we'd have to be setting the workflow state to 12. So this is interesting. This is where we just see that to be 12, and we can then save the changes. And if we want to be absolutely precise, then what we do is we have to use the same bit of code that we did here, where we jumped from our page. We can then, as soon as we've done this, we just need to redirect back to our back to our opportunity summary page. Now we don't have to do any other mode checking or anything, because we're not editing a screen or anything here. All we're doing is forcing on the behavior of the workflow. And so now inside our screen, if I refresh this, we can see that we've got our lead is the current state. We've got jump to lead to quoted. Now if I click from that, we can see we run, and you can see that we're now on the quoted stage, and it's a different set of workflow actions. Now of course it hasn't done anything in our page, but that's not the purpose. We can see this is where the quote, the comments go. This is what you do, okay? So but the chief thing about what we were trying to explain in this example was showing that you can control workflow using all of the information. Everything about this course is trying to get you to understand it builds up with all of the previous information to get to the point where you can control CRM. Okay, we are at the end of today's lesson. Very long lesson. I hope that you've been able to stay with me all the way through and that it's been interesting.